Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On this very special day, we have with us the first winner of IsDB Prize for Impactful Achievement in Islamic Economics for the Knowledge Contribution category in 2024, Professor Mehmet Asutay. Professor Mehmet has a Bachelor in Public Finance from the University of Istanbul, Turkey. He continued for Master in Public Finance at the University of Istanbul. He also has a postgraduate diploma in Economic and Social Policy Analysis, University of York, UK, Master in Economics of Public Policy, Department of Economics of the University of Leicester, UK, PhD in Political Economics, University of Leicester, UK. Professor Mehmet joined the School of Government and International Affairs at Durham University in 2005, and later moved to Durham University Business School in January 2014 with the transfer of all Islamic finance-related programs to the Durham University Business School. He teaches and supervises research on Islamic political economy, Islamic moral economy, Islamic banking, finance and management, and political economy of development in the Middle East, including Turkish political economy and Kurdish political economy. Professor Mehmet is also the director of the Durham Center for Islamic Economics and Finance, the program director for Master in Islamic Finance and Master in Islamic Finance and Management, and the director of the Durham Islamic Finance Summer School. Professor Mehmet is the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Islamic and Society, editor-in-chief of the Review of Islamic Economics, and in the editorial board of the International Journal of Islamic and Middle Eastern Finance and Management, and Borsa Istanbul Review. He is also a board member of the International Association for Islamic Economics. Congratulations, Professor Mehmet, and welcome to Jeddah.
Thank you very much for having me. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. It's good to be here.
Thank you very much. Can you tell us about yourself and what has triggered you to work on Islamic economics and finance?
I guess everything has to be traced back one's background, how one's background, the geography that each one of us come from, has impact on the future of the professional life as well. So I was born in a small Kurdish village in the eastern part of Turkey. And with this whole idea of the generation of developing ideas for development. So you are talking about 1960s and 70s, the development agenda was very much around. So I was born within that context. Then moving to Istanbul, settling in Istanbul, and then my education, and going to the university studying economics and public finance. So that was an important trigger in terms of the generations, how they wanted to contribute to the development of the country, the region, from the village to the center. And hence my trajectory is very much linked with that as well. Because when we look at the generation in the 1960s within that context, not only in Turkey, but most of the Muslim world, it was very much the engineering ideas, the generation of engineers trying to bring development, the roads, the dams, and all those projects. And then when it trickled down to my generation, it was the roads are happening, but the development is not taking place, and hence the importance of developing the necessary policies somehow. Of course, these are my interpretation from today of the past. And therefore, my education trajectory and later with my further education, that played an important role, how development can be achieved to that extent that the human well-beings can be essentialized rather than only focusing on the physical infrastructure, the physical development. And of course, that link with the background, a small village, the life in that small Kurdish village or any parts of the developing countries was very much similar, how that played an important role in terms of getting the motivation. But of course, the motivation to study economics, in particular political economy, later in my life, because political economy is something, unfortunately, is not very much prioritized in developing countries, because it forces you to ask questions. Yes, the infrastructure is here, but the development is not trickled down. It's not affecting the life of ordinary individuals. And therefore, my interest developed in political economy in later life. But my initial engagement with Islamic economics in particular was in my last years at the university in Istanbul, with the Islamic identity that I was carrying. And with that, I always consider that it has to have certain impact on whatever we study as well, whatever the profession that we want to develop, and whatever the content and the context that we want to produce in the end. Whether we are studying engineering, whether economics, finance, politics, whatever, that has to have, Islam should have certain implications, because in everyday life, it has rules, norms, principles, and it has to affect the everyday life. I guess that search for everydayness as part of the Islamic identity, because my generation was part of that huge Islamic identity search as well, and looking how that Islamic identity search is articulated in different parts of life, including economics and finance, has triggered this interest in me, looking at what material was available those years in the bookshops in Istanbul. Of course, it was very much limited. I remember the very first book, to be honest, I was gifted by a friend. It was by, again, Sabri Orman, late Sabri Orman, Professor Sabri Orman, on Ghazali's Ghazali's thought on economics. And then later I developed this interest, and the very first book I remember I ordered, because those years you didn't have online platforms to buy books. But when I moved to the University of York to study for my master's, I went to the bookshop. I was looking for Islamic economics book. In the second-hand bookshop, I could locate some Middle East related economic books, but not Islamic. So I went to the bookshop. Of course, you don't have the online platforms. They had to go through this list of books, and in the end, they could find me one. And that was the very first book I bought in the UK. I think the idea how the Islamic identity has to be expressed in terms of completeness rather than segmented. If your life is around prayers, for instance, conducting your prayers, but that should have effect in everyday life, so that the Islamic identity can be complete, but also perhaps a dissatisfaction with the existing economic policies, unfortunately not delivering for ordinary people, and that forces you to teach beyond the box whether there are any other alternative ways of organizing or reorganizing economy and the society. And therefore, as part of that Islamic identity search, how Islam can be articulated in economic area as well. I guess the completeness, or aiming to complete the Islamic identity, was an important trigger, plus the non-functioning of the economic policies in terms of delivering for ordinary people. Again, locating that or relating that back to the village life, how the village life could not be developed enough so that people could live in their dignities. Again, combining all this together, I guess, provided me a reason as well as a motivation to look for alternative ways of how the entire social formation can be reorganized around the permissibilities of Islam, so that the accessibility to resources can be arranged. So that was very much the motivation. That was very much the motivation that triggered my interest, as well as my commitment to Islamic economics.
Thank you very much, Professor. Who has been the source of inspiration for you, and how do you keep yourself motivated?
I think I was very lucky when I first moved to Leicester University to do my last master and PhD. I wasn't very happy, to be honest, that I ended up with Leicester. Although the reason I went because there was a particular supervisor that I wanted to work with him. But somehow I had this dissatisfaction with the university. Um, but I never knew that Allah had another plan for me, because that was this amazing opportunity for me. On the one hand, I'm as an individual looking for how I can manage to get into Islamic economics. On the other hand, Leicester was, of course, house for one of the leading institutions in the time, that is the Islamic Foundation in the UK in Leicester, led by Professor Khurshid Ahmed, the first winner of the Islamic Development Bank Prize, of course. Then my relationship, of course, realizing that this is this institution here is an amazing opportunity for me to get engaged, which I did during my master's and PhDs. I closely engaged with Islamic Foundation and hence colleagues working at Islamic Foundation in Islamic economics. But importantly, of course, one of the leading, what I call the founding fathers, Khurshid Ahmed. And because Islamic Foundation was there as an important hub, it was an attraction point from different parts of the world, and the leading individuals around Khurshid Ahmed used to visit the Islamic Foundation. So that gave me an amazing opportunity to meet, again, the other founding fathers, such as Omar Chopra. Of course, he also served this institution, Najatullah Siddiqui, among others. That was an amazing opportunity for me that I was blessed. Although, as I mentioned, I wasn't happy to go to Leicester University, although my supervisor was someone that I wanted to work, but that was something hidden for me there. So that was my formal initial engagement with Islamic economics related studies, because those years Islamic Foundation started as well. I think it was 1993, the intensive course in Islamic economics, banking with the, of course, IRTI, Islamic Research and Training Institute, which is now the ISDB Institute. So that attracted many leading individuals come to Leicester, to Islamic Foundation to deliver sessions, and hence my exposure to the content of those trainings, intensive courses, but also meeting all these amazing individuals, founding fathers, and the leading individuals in the field. And that was my initial engagement formally with Islamic economics and finance. And strangely how Islamic Development Bank, therefore, through the intensive courses, played an important role. But importantly, how my engagement, and later I became assistant to Professor Khurshid Ahmed, has opened up an amazing avenue for me to meet all these leading individuals, including Chopra, Siddiqui, Naqvi, among others. That has been an amazing experience. But later, the motivation, sustaining that motivation, I think Islamic economics, as I always say, I am not in Islamic economics only because I am Muslim. Of course, that's an important part, my Muslim identity and the commitment through that. But importantly, my intellectual conviction. And that is very much important for me, because I would consider Islamic knowledge, ontological Islamic knowledge, is very much start with Shahada. So you would witness, as the Shahada would say, that you are witnessing to the existence of Allah, but there is no God but Allah. So that witnessing part directly requires not the belief. You wouldn't say that I believe in Allah, but you would say that I witness that there is Allah. So that conviction, therefore, that intellectual conviction has been an important part for me, that I consider, regardless of the political economy, the global domination of capitalism and etc., the search for a better system of economy has to take place. And when I And when I search for that, I consider Islam an amazing capability to produce an alternative way of organizing society around the resources so that justice can be established, people can have access to resources. So that has become a passion for me. That conviction, intellectual conviction, has become a passion for me. And then I was given this amazing opportunity to meet amazing students from different parts of the world. And with them, I have been working, studying, and researching and publishing to get the idea out, not only in the Muslim circles, but in non-Muslim circles, that there is this idea of Islamic economics and finance, which can bring peace, which can deliver justice. And as I mentioned, I'm not doing that only because I am Muslim, but at the same time, with this intellectual conviction, in addition to my faith, has been an important motivation for me to sustain this amazing passion that I have.
Thank you very much, Professor. What was the meaning of winning the IsDB Prize to you?
Well, as I mentioned, I have to say that I am a person who shines away from prizes. And therefore, when colleagues mentioned in the past as well that they should nominate me, I was very cautious. But somehow this time they said that, look, I cannot escape, and they have to nominate me. I accepted the nomination. It was a strange feeling in the sense that because I thought that perhaps in the past I didn't accept the nomination because I thought that I haven't reached to that maturity. Because I always consider that winning such prizes, one has to have such maturity level, not in terms of age, but the thinking process resulting into certain theoretical conceptualization, practical contribution, and etc. Of course, the nature of prize has changed since the time of Professor Khurshid Ahmed and today. But it's an amazing feeling in terms of being, member of such a selective group, what I call the founding fathers. Of course, I don't consider myself part of that founding fathers, not only in terms of age, but in terms of contribution. But to be part of the same group of people, it gives me an amazing feeling that I'm really grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving me this level of trust, or having people around me to have such level of trust that I came to a level that I should be given the prize. So it's an amazing fulfillment, but at the same time it brings you the responsibility, because some people would consider that this is the end of history. You have achieved, you have come, but I feel that this brings the responsibility that you have to be motivated further to do more, to bring Islamic economics and finance ideas into the practice, so that the everyday life of everyday people can be positively affected. So on the one hand, it's an amazing feeling of fulfillment. On the other hand, it provides you with a responsibility to contribute further to make this idea a possibility. I don't have any problem with utopia. So some people would consider Islamic economics utopia, Islamic, but I always remind them that the Islamic finance was considered to be an utopia. But it is there, it is operating, it is contributing, regardless of the criticism that we have. So in order to generate futures and the realities, we need to have utopias. So Islamic economics as an ideal has to be taught, has to be expanded, has to be researched, has to be constituted, and that the prize comes with that responsibility that I have to work, generate ideas, work with my students, colleagues, and friends to get the theories of Islamic economics, the conceptual definitions, the theories, and hopefully the practice and the policies. Hence, it's a very positive feeling of fulfillment, but at the same time, it comes with the idea of responsibility.
How do you see the landscape, past, current, future projection of Islamic economics and finance knowledge? How do you see your contribution in shaping it?
I think when we look at in modern times, the initial contributions is very much in the post-colonial times. So we are talking about late 1950s and onward. Of course, when we look at today, compared to 60s, 70s, even 80s, the number of publications that we have in Islamic finance in particular has been amazing. And Islamic finance related publication has managed to find opportunities in the mainstream publications rather than being a niche Muslim market publication. Now the leading journals in the world published by leading publication houses led by leading individuals publish papers in Islamic finance related areas. But my main concern is that most of the papers have been focusing on the performance of Islamic finance, the past performance, using the data and looking at the efficiency, the profitability, and all those very quantitative aspects of Islamic finance. But because Islamic finance as an industry is successful, capital accumulation has taken place, capital movements are taking place, and therefore in the research and knowledge development field, what we see entire shift on the Islamic finance related empirical studies. However, an important issue, one, Islamic finance related innovative research in terms of product development, institutional development is very sluggish. And that's a major concern. The second major concern that I have, unfortunately, the publication shifting into examining Islamic banking and finance industry has resulted in neglecting the research in Islamic economics, what I call Islamic political economy and Islamic moral economy. So that has important consequences because Islamic finance have to have its own theoretical framework. And its theoretical framework has to be located in Islamic economics. But when you do not have knowledge development in Islamic economics, the foundation of Islamic finance is shifting in terms of knowledge to the conventional neoclassical neoliberal area. And therefore, in the end, what we produce an hybrid identity as Islamic banking and finance in terms of our research, but also practice. Now, there is nothing wrong with hybrid identities because when we look at history evolved through societies exchanging ideas and practices between themselves. But there was one thing that in the past, the societies did not have political hegemony over each other. But today, the global politics and political economy is so hegemonic, it doesn't allow your knowledge base and the practice to be at the same level with their own. So you have the hegemony of the classical conventional knowledge and the Western knowledge. So with that, Islamic finance research and practice entirely moving towards the institutional logic of capitalism is a concern. And therefore, this ongoing debate whether Islamic finance is Islamic enough is not ending because the foundational issues. And therefore, rather than putting all our eggs in one basket, that is very much the Islamic banking and finance related research, empirical research, we have to put efforts on the Islamic economics related theoretical knowledge, conceptual knowledge, so that we can develop the theoretical frameworks for Islamic banking and finance to be able to express itself within the foundational norms and the principles, and also with objectives. Hopefully, if we can develop programs to be able to articulate and hence rather than having a partial analysis, because it was a partial analysis that the founding fathers raised huge criticism against neoclassical economics and capitalism in terms of not delivering to the developing countries. I feel that we are following the same trajectory, and therefore recalling the initial point of the founding fathers, I think we have to look at also going back to the foundations to look at how Islamic economics related theoretical frameworks can be developed so that the policies and the practices can be developed in relation to that, in consistency with the theory. Now, in relation to that, how I fit into that, my effort has been very much on the reconstituting the whole idea of Islamic economics. As part of that, I have been trying to frame it as a moral economy, because I feel that the economics as a term within Islamic economics has particular implication that does not necessarily relate to Islamic objective of what we want to do. Because that economics very much the definition of human, a particular definition of human, that human, the maximizing individual, the rational individual, and all that assumptions. And therefore, to keep away from that, rather than an Islamization process, I have been propagating for the authentic expression of our knowledge bases, not as economics, but Islam as a system of knowledge, the cognitive system of Islam, and within that as Islamic moral economy, and how that Islamic moral economy can be articulated. As nowadays, everyone is talking about sustainable development, but I feel that in the economics terms, sustainable development is terribly difficult to achieve, because the variables are omitted in the definition of that economics. It's very much work around the efficiency of capital, everything around capital optimization. So if that's the objective, then how sustainability can be achieved? However, I am strongly convinced that Islamic economics can offer, Islamic moral economy and political economy can offer that opportunity to have a consistent policy to produce sustainability, because it would, in my definition and theoretical expression of Islamic moral economy, political economy, all the variables that we are concerned with, including human, environment, land, they are all included, including society, in your modes of production and the value theory, and therefore you can produce a sustainable outcome through that. And so that's my very much the research on going back to the theoretical frames of how Islamic cognitive system, the knowledge base, can produce alternative ways of organizing the society around the resources that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for everyone to have access, and how that can be possible. So that perhaps can be a good summary of what I do.
If turning back the clock is possible, is there anything that you would have done differently in your professional life?
At one point at the university in my last year undergrads, I was very much obsessed with the technocrats of the 1960s generation in Turkey, who were very much involved in development processes, the infrastructure, the roads and the dams and this and that. But in the last year of my undergrad years, I realized that, as I mentioned in the beginning, how that development is not particularly producing the just results, the fair results that we want to consider. And therefore, I moved from that idea of being part of that technocracy, but moving into academia. And with that academic engagement, I thought I could be part of a generation who can, on the one hand, contribute to theoretical frames, but at the same time can contribute to policy outcomes as well. At this stage where I am now, whatever I have done in academia is something, of course, you never finish. There is never the end of history. But I think engaging with development-oriented platforms and with them testing the ideas that I have been engaging and trying to develop would have been a good opportunity. But in terms of going back, I think I would have, in addition to studying like all my masters in economics, economic policy, and social policy, I think I would have considered taking a comprehensive study combining politics, politics, philosophy, sociology, and anthropology. I think this would have been an amazing opportunity because what I feel, even within Islamic economics and Islamic finance, we are still operating within the Western paradigm of knowledge in terms of segmented areas, economics, finance, but these are divorced from the larger knowledge base, and therefore it produces the partial analysis, unfortunately, we are facing, and through which the founding fathers criticized economics as a knowledge. I think having such an opportunity, studying philosophy, sociology, anthropology, type of humanities based disciplines would have provided me a comprehensive understanding of how economics and finance related issues can be connected as part of a whole rather than just a simple partial analysis. Of course, in my academic research, I try to overcome the borders of the disciplines and try to bring them together because Islamic cognitive knowledge cannot be segmented. Islam comes through Tawheed as the totality, ecumenical, the totality of knowledge. And therefore, I try to develop my understanding within that totality, but I think having a formal education in those areas would have been an amazing opportunity. But also, where I am now, perhaps I could connect what I'm doing with the development processes taking place in the Muslim world, and therefore engaging with development-oriented agencies is something that I would look. But I would not have, in terms of looking at the past. It is not that I would not have started still with an organization involved in development, but again, I would have again opted for research and development in terms of academia. I think that has been an amazingly fruitful professional choice for me. That I found my voice in academia. I found that I could express my ideas, but importantly, reconstitute ideas. And therefore, I'm glad that I didn't go with the idea of technocracy, as I was very much excited in the initial years of my undergrad years, because they were the heavy presence of technocrats in the public life those years, and I was very much influenced with their presence. But I think in the last moment choice of moving to academia was the best choice that I have done.
Thank you for the deliberations of many different aspects, Professor. Now we come to the next round of the interview, namely rapid fire questions. In this question, out of 2 words I will mention, you only have to pick one, and it has to be quick. Also, please feel free to elaborate why you picked that answer. Professor Mehmet, are you ready?
Yep.
Islamic finance or Islamic economics?
I will go Islamic finance because I talked a lot on Islamic economics in the earlier discussions in responding to your questions. Islamic finance, I feel that despite the criticism that I and others bring, whether it is fulfilling the objective, it has been an amazing development discourse and practice. Coming up with the idea in the last 100, 200 years of in the Muslim world, coming up with an idea of an institution which brings together whatever the capital available in one jurisdiction and utilizing that for moving capital from one place to another for whatever the purpose is an exciting idea. And considering the global reaction to anything about Islamic, how Islamic finance managed to express itself in terms of acceptability all over the world. The number of countries beyond the Muslim countries engaging with Islamic finance demonstrates and manifests its successes. However, at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we want this development directly relate and go back to the foundational objective of developing a fairer society rather than just focusing on capital movement and hence capital efficiency. But our concerns is very much the social efficiency as well. So rather than focusing ourselves and locking ourselves with the neoclassical understanding of what capital is, and hence putting all the efforts for the efficiency frontiers. It is time, perhaps again, going into innovative research, how we can create equity frontiers, how Islamic finance therefore can operate within the equity frontiers by decoupling from the existing institutional logic of conventional banking and finance. And therefore, it opens up, it provides us an amazing opportunity space rather than mimicking, but being innovative, developing ideas. Because the problem with the hybridity is, unfortunately, it forces you to give up search for authenticity. And therefore, we have to look into how authentic solutions can be brought to Islamic finance, such as an idea, equity frontier rather than efficiency frontier, so that we can see how different stakeholders in the society can benefit from Islamic finance. So that is something that I would consider an innovative project that we have to put our minds together to make Islamic finance to fit into its initial objectives. Of course, I do acknowledge the successes despite all the difficulties in each Muslim country and globally, but Islamic finance has established itself now. Let's go to the next stage of institutional as well as the product developments, but importantly, how paradigms that we can develop, such as the equity frontiers, can provide a new opportunity space to redefine Islamic finance so that it can produce the outcomes within the objective functions of Islamic economics.
Thank you, Professor. Timing inflation or achieving growth?
Well, inflation, because currently the entire world, one way or another, is suffering with terrible inflation that we have around us. In some countries, of course, that inflation rate as double digits and going up in the process. Inflation is important beyond being a macroeconomic variable. The impact, unfortunately, the adverse impact it has in the lower income strata of the society, hence create these terrible inequalities and also accessibility, enhances the accessibility problem to resources. So it is not only a macroeconomic variables that with the technocracy that we can consider in terms of an equation, if I move this one up, how this can move, but beyond that, how it creates all these social problems in the society to the extent that increasing poverty in the societies. That social concern is more important than considering inflation as a macroeconomic variables. Unfortunately, in the debates, what we see, inflation is considered to monetary policies, how we can affect inflation, but unfortunately, the consequences, the process, the inflationary process that produces all these adverse social outcomes are not very much considered and tackled. And the worst part of the story, when adjustment policies are developed or policies are developed to tackle inflation, immediately the impact again goes to the lower income strata, such as the increase of taxes, because the lower income strata cannot escape. And most of this increase in taxes we would see, such as the VAT, for instance, imposed on everyday consume goods and services. And unfortunately, therefore, the regressive impact on the lower income strata in the inflationary process on the lower income strata, but in the recovery process is again on the lower income strata, such as when we look at the IMF policies helping countries to get out of the inflationary process or their economic difficulties, it's always the lower income strata of the societies that are targeted. So therefore, my major concern, or the major concern that I have in relation to inflation, the social impact. Unfortunately, it creates huge arrays of social impact beyond accessibility and poverty, but unfortunately the values as well being contested under inflationary process. So that will be my response to inflation related.
Thank you, Professor. Next question, ethics or law?
Now, ethics, of course, is something that I would go for in comparison to law, because what happened, the development of law over the centuries has opted for a very rational, in a very rational manner. And this is what we see, unfortunately, in fiqh as well, expression of fiqh as well, as we see in Islamic finance. Such as in Islamic finance, we move capital from A to B as long as this is halal, so the transaction is halal. But we do not look at the consequences of this transaction. So the consequences directly relates to ethics and morality. What consequences we produced, and that's an important issue that is missing, unfortunately, in economics, but also in other realms as well, politics and other realms. And therefore, bringing back ethics it has been an important effort. So of course, with sustainable development, there has been this movement towards a global movement towards bringing ethics back. But I feel that that's not a substantiated ethics, but it is moderating ethics or instrumental ethics, because the initial equation still operates as it is, based on non-ethical world, a very rational area. And then what we are saying, that we have to moderate the consequences of whatever the outcomes that we produce. The consequences have to be moderated. But rather, ethics suggests that, so in a substantive manner, in the initial equation, so if you have capital, you have to bring all the other stakeholders together so that we can produce outcomes that are ethically acceptable. And therefore, as Amartya Sen would say, that the removal ethics has reduced the capability of economics to be able to produce acceptable outcomes. And in order to overcome that, ethics has been an important part of the process. Of course, Islamic economics, Islamic finance inherently have this ethics. But unfortunately, again, as I mentioned, moving away from the institutional logic of Islam into the conventional institutional logic through Islamic finance, unfortunately, and the rational expression of fiqh, unfortunately, has relegated ethics to the lower level. It is time for us to bring ethics back as an essential criteria to evaluate our transactions, our behaviors, so that the outcomes, whether sustainable development outcomes or other outcomes, can be generated in the process.
مقاصد الشريعة or SDGs.
Okay, I think I'll go for sustainable development goals. It relates to the earlier response that I provided, and it relates to Maqasid al-Sharia as well. Now, sustainable development goals, of course, as I mentioned, has been an important movement, a global movement, in terms of recognizing that capitalism, one way or another, failed, and therefore, in order to correct the outcomes of capitalism, we have to look into sustainable development, and the practices have to be reconstituted so that sustainability can be internalized, or as an outcome can be produced. Now, that's a very positive movement, in the sense that although this debate hasn't taken place, but expressing sustainable development goal at the UN level, in a global level, is a direct recognition of the failure of capitalism. That's first thing. The second and important thing, however, sustainable development goals do not go into the initial equation and bring all the variables together, all the stakeholders together. It is a moderating process. So therefore, in order to overcome and bring substantive morality to sustainability, we have to go beyond the process of sustainable development goals, but making them as a substantive ethical issues rather than instrumental and correcting process. So you continue your practice, you produce environmental problem, but then let's correct it. No, we should not produce environmental problem. That is the essential criteria that we have to consider. Yes, poverty, but we have to help people to get out of poverty by redistribution, such as zakat and waqf systems that we have. But also we have to ask the question, why poor is poor? Okay, so that becomes a resource allocation issue. Rather than just a redistribution through zakat and waqf. So therefore, that brings us the essential issues, the substantive morality. And that, of course, directly linked with Maqasid al-Sharia. And therefore, how Maqasid al-Sharia as a methodology has to be developed, through which the well-being of humans and other stakeholders has to be considered in the initial decision-making process, rather than deferring that through sustainable development goals and moderating the consequences, to the extent that on the one hand we are talking about sustainable development goals, on the other hand we have legitimized carbon trading. So that shows the inconsistency, and in order to overcome that inconsistency, therefore, at least within the Islamic political economy, the importance of Maqasid al-Sharia, which can provide that framework for us to essentialize each of the stakeholders in the initial equation, so that we create a world of sustainable development.
Lastly, any words of advice to the millennial generation who has aspiration to be successful in the field of economic development and or Islamic economics and finance?
I think when I look at the new generation, I see them very much aware of sustainable development related issues. That's a very positive development that we see around us. In other words, 1960s to 1990s technocracy of the development, physical development aspect or the expression has been, and the actors now is being replaced by new generation of people who considers sustainable development rather than just a physical development. That's a positive news. And of course, the role of social media plays an important role in diffusing the idea of sustainable development. That's very, very good. But we want to see the new generation to have this substantive morality-based idea of sustainable development, rather than just dealing with the moderating processes. And therefore, the way of life, the practices, the production processes, and all that has to change. The fair trade movement in the UK in 1990s, 2000s, are very exciting. But fair trade is no longer a solution, because unfortunately what we see, heavy dominance of corporations over the resources. And therefore, the new generation, my suggestion is, looking at how new practices, new ideas, new developments can be produced beyond the corporations, but looking at in the civil society oriented solutions. And those civil society initiatives are developing, taking place in certain part of the world. In the Muslim world, we have seen microfinance through civil society being very successful. And therefore, I think looking at the new generation, their orientation, I think there's a huge opportunity space has opened up to bring, rather than the very institutional corporate level of development and finance, looking in within the civil society in the smaller scale what can be done. Because on the one hand, we are talking about sustainable development, but we do not change our production and the consumption scale. I guess if we do a correlation between sustainable development discourse and the consumption pattern in every part of the world, we will see a positive relationship between them. However, sustainable development directly tells that, look, the earth is not anymore, earth cannot take it anymore. The climate is not taking it anymore. So we have to scale down the consumption, the production, so that the sustainability can be possible. So the new generation have to understand that, yes, they got those amazing protests, and they essentialize sustainable development, but in their consumption level, they have to understand as well that they have to scale down. And that is something, the amount of coffee the new generation consumes, it creates an unsustainability problem in itself. So therefore, we have to look at the consistency between behavior and the objectives. I think they are very lucky that these are the debates are taking place in front of them. Our generation and generation before, therefore, their world was very much the technocracy related development, but they have this opportunity space. They have to be critical. They have to develop a critical understanding to look at the realities, even if those realities are Islamic finance related. They have to look at the practice, the essence of Islamic finance, of course, Islam, but the practice, the way we practice is everyday life. So we have to develop critical mind, so that a new leadership can emerge in the Muslim world, in Islamic economics and finance, to take the discourse to the next stage. Because my fear is that the Islamic economics and finance programs we have in the Muslim world has become they have turned into training programs, training people to work in Islamic banks and financial institutions, rather than developing critical minds to bring the next stage of Islamic banking and finance, rather than repeating what the previous generation has created. I think, therefore, the critical minds are essential for us. And my suggestion to the new generation to be critically develop a critical understanding of the reality and how we can all work together to create the next generation of leadership in Islamic economics and banking, so that the outcomes that we hope for and the consequences that we are expecting can be generated. But as the Quran suggests, I'm hopeful. Despite all those calamities that we have around us, despite all the difficulties we have around us, despite all these regulative impositions on Islamic finance, and despite Islamic economics is not being taken as serious as it should be, I'm hopeful that there will be opportunity spaces in the coming years, so that we can all work together to constitute the future, so that the whole initial objective of justice, a fair system, resource accessibility can be possible, inshallah.
Thank you, Professor Mehmet, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of the day. And again, congratulations for winning the IDB Prize for Impactful Achievement in Islamic Economics for the Knowledge Contribution category in 2024. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here and great to be back to Jeddah and Islamic Development Bank. And thank you for hosting me.
Thank you very much, Sam.